Hi, this is Jim Cranston from 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com, the podcast and website by, for, and about baby boomers. Hope you could join me yesterday. I did a little Valentine's Day wish, and I had a lot of fun doing that. But tonight we're going to be talking more about life choices and what we allow and how we allow other things to control our lives and who really is setting our own goals. So let's get started on that. But first, actually, I forgot a quick follow-up. Remember last week we talked about Donovan Carrillo, who's a Mexican figure skater. And so Donovan did skate finally in the long presentation, but unfortunately he did have a fall. However, he ended up in 22nd place overall. And he's still totally pumped to compete again in Milan Olympics. Remember, we had talked about him. It's kind of an interesting story about personal determination and fighting prejudice and harassment from all his macho peers because he was a skater, not a football player. And then he actually had to move away from home to find a place to skate and still made it to world-class level skating as truly a true amateur. There wasn't one of these kind of amateurs that's sponsored at a camp and the food is provided for and everything else. He and his family and friends actually paid for this. He skated in a rink at a shopping center with lousy ice most of the time and still made it to the Olympics. So felicidades y mil gracias a Donovan Carrillo. Extreme goal setting and follow through in action. It's really, check him out. He's a pretty neat kid, and I expect you'll see more of him in Milan. Hopefully he does really well. So back to the main topic of life choices and goals. I expect that, probably most, if not all of us, feel at some level that we're kind of in charge of our lives. We all have moments where we kind of think, life is a constant fire drill. But other than that, we kind of at least superficially feel like we're sort of running most aspects of our lives. But I also expect if you really listen to the little voices inside us, that we also kind of think that maybe we're pretty influenced by a lot of external things, maybe more external things that we would like, whether it's your comments from friends or, neighbors, social media, one-upmanship, there's a ton of that going on. Some cover page story you see about the best way to serve a meal and you look at your own table, you go, didn't do a very good job of that. Google and Facebook's, totally intrusive tracking and suggestions all the time. We're bombarded with suggestions and false goals that are often not in our own best interest. So when you add to that, of course, all the society's just must-haves, like spending a ton of money for that Super Bowl bash you put on. I was reading, it was estimated that $14.6 billion with a B, or about $78.92 per person, was spent on Super Bowl food. That to me is just mind-boggling. But even beyond things like that, there's all the attitude you get from other people about society, about your family, about whatever they have their cranky pants on. And you really start to realize when you start looking at it, why it's so difficult to actually set your own goals and follow your own dreams and passions. How many times have you sat down and you're just thinking about something, you say, boy, if I could start over, or if I had it to do all again, or if I were a teenager again, or if I were 25 again, or whatever it is, how many times you go back and say, boy, if I could just change the decisions I made. And so in reality, what is really keeping you from doing that? And, as we talked about a few weeks ago, when you say yes to something, then you have to say no to something else. And of course, the corollary to that is if you say no to something, then you free up the life space and the energy to say yes to something new. And that's really important. So now back to that same awkward question again, what in reality is really keeping you from making a change and pursuing the goals that are truly important to you, that you're really help you fulfill your life's passions? Is it overthinking and overplanning? Or is that just an excuse? Like loading yourself up with all sorts of little kind of needless tasks and then saying you're too busy to do anything like those important tasks. And that's something I personally am super guilty of that. It's my favorite way to procrastinate. And I've done that for years and I manage it a little better now. But we all have our own tricks to kind of keep us in that safe space. There's a fellow, Bob Parson. He is a former active Marine. Was the founder of GoDaddy, which is the big domain registrar. They had a big ad campaign a few years back. He sold that for over $1 billion. And he was a very interesting fellow because he he started his company doing something entirely different. It was a software development company, pivoted to becoming a registrar. He had this feeling that this thing called the internet was really going to catch on. And now he runs a big charity, and he's an interesting fellow on a lot of different levels. But I have one of his signed and framed posters. He has this poster called Bob's 16 Rules for Success. And most of them are useful. But there's three in particular that really stick out. And on the list are number 3, 4, and 5. And number 3 is, when you're ready to give up, you're probably closer than you think. And 4 is, imagine the worst that could possibly happen in great detail, and then realize it probably won't happen to you, so you don't have to be scared of it. And then 3rd is, focus on what you want to have happen, because you will be as you think. And I think all 3 of those are really important when it comes to setting life goals. The 3rd one we've talked about before, of how to envision goals and then work towards them to help you get through obstacles. In part of that, I know I come across this at times kind of like, how am I ever going to get this done? There just seems like there's an endless number of tasks. And in reality, if you start going ahead with them, you find out, I was actually pretty close to getting done anyway, but just my brain had kind of told me to put the brakes on and take a break. But in reality, you're a lot closer than you thought. And that middle one, imagine the worst in detail, and then realize it probably won't happen to you. That one's really important insofar as setting your own personal goals, particularly when they go against the goals of what society has in mind for you. But first, a real quick paraphrasing of a saying I was just reading in a Buddhist meditation book. I'll get the title and everything for you. I forgot to bring it over with me. But it's simple. Probably a number of people have said this. The past is already gone. The future's not yet here. We have to choose to live in the present moment. And so to me, that's pretty powerful. The past is already gone. There's nothing you can do about it. You can learn from it. You may have regrets from it, but you certainly can learn from it. The future is not yet here. We can think about the future all we want. We can try and make it happen, but the future is not yet here, so we don't know what it's going to be. We have to choose to live in the present moment. And that one's a real sleeper, because it's kind of like, well, yeah, we're always in the present moment, but are we really in the present moment? Because it's very easy to cruise through the present moment and not really being living. You can sit and watch TV, you can read a cheap novel, you can do whatever you want, you can do pleasurable things. You can even do things that have some degree of meaning to you, but aren't really super important to you. But if you really want to grasp what's going on and to set the future that you want, then we can imagine what we want our future to be, and we can make the conscious decision right now in the current moment to start making the future that we want to live. That's why I say it's a real sleeper statement, because by living in the present mindfully and thinking about what we want to have happen, we can actually direct our lives in a direction that brings us goals that really have meaning. So let's go back and look what might be holding us back. And if all those fears are really justifiable, remember that most of the things that we have learned that define us as failures, those are things that society taught us. Losing our fancy car, having to live frugally for a few years. There's a whole bunch of things did you hear about, poor old, Harry, he, lost his house, right? That clearly means he's a failure. And no one ever considers that maybe he lost his house because it was no longer important to him, and he decided to follow other goals. So, it's interesting that most of these things that define us as failures are financial or financially based in nature. As a society, certainly in the West here, we tend to put an awful lot of importance on the financial side of things. And so when we redefine ourselves in terms of, say, personal satisfaction, let's call it spiritual wealth, and I don't mean spiritual in a religious sense. It can be that. But however you define your own spirituality and your own inner spirit, if you define your life in terms of spiritual wealth rather than monetary wealth, suddenly your whole future opens up for you. What's important to your spirit may include financial wealth. Maybe it's that you want to help other people. Maybe you want to start a charity like Bob Parsons did. Maybe there's a lot of things you want to do. It doesn't mean that monetary wealth or physical wealth is a bad thing, but probably just having money is not your goal. most people that live life that way, it's very easy to find examples where they weren't really all that happy. People who combine that with other things, or people who just prioritize other things that really fulfill their passion, tend to live a much more fulfilling and happy life. Maybe working 60 hours a week so you can get a great big house all of a sudden starts seeming a lot less desirable when you realize you could take a more reasonable job and spend every night with your family, or have time to volunteer, or maybe just travel or lecture, or whatever it is that makes you feel fulfilled. But we're trained to live according to society's rules, and how society defines wealth and satisfaction. And that's mostly money-based. We are living our lives by someone else's goals and not our own. So there's a friend of mine, Ben Killoy. Where's Ben's little banner? Ben's an awesome guy. His primary audience are returning veterans, and primarily returning veteran dads, and how to get out of the military, back into civilian life, reconnect with your family and your spouse and your kids and all that stuff. And so it's a real passion for Ben. And he just had a post that he liked today. And unfortunately, because of the mechanics, the way all these social media services work, the post disappeared and I have no way to find it back. It's really very annoying. They want you to keep coming back and looking for new things. And so for people like me who value the things I see, it's very difficult. But anyway, so he had a friend, and his friend had a video that he posted all about recovering from a broken childhood in active military duty. That itself was an interesting post, but featured prominently in that post was a piece on an archery store owner. I believe it was M&M Archery, who, after learning about this Ben's friends, his history, talked with him on the phone. They really connected and ultimately refocused a good part of his archery business on serving recovering veterans, because it was something where it's a hobby that you can do a lot of places, but it still requires patience and skill and focus. And it's all the things that when you come back all wound up from a bad situation, oftentimes the PTSD and just other tremendous stresses in your life, it's hard to get yourself to settle down and calm down. And it turned out that archery played a big part in Ben's friend's recovery. And so this archery store owner now has a whole piece of his business serving recovering veterans. And so, kind of superficially, apparently it seems like the business still has the same goals of selling archery equipment and stuff. But because he redefined his purpose and the purpose of his business, and now became a passion for the owner of this store. Now instead of just going to business and, let's see how much money I can make, it's go to business and go to work and see how many people I can help. Doesn't mean he can't have financial goals. Doesn't mean that he has to stop living a comfortable life. But now he has more purpose in his life. And every day he knows, boy, I can actually help other people live a better life. That's the difference between living by the rules that society creates. And those rules, basically pretty much come down to make lots of money. But instead living towards your own goals and passions. In this case, using your business to help struggling veterans readjust to civilian life. Think about what a difference that must have made in this gentleman's life. That instead of just going through and having a successful business and something that he liked, now he has a successful business and something that he likes, and a personal passion to help other people recover their lives. How much better and satisfying is that? So most all of us have those same passionate drives and desires, but we're constantly blocked by these false goals that society throws in our way to distract us. And most of those false goals are ostensibly good for society. We want to get the GNP up, or whatever. I just saw a big thing now that many of the politicians are imploring the businesses, please force your people back to the offices, because the cities don't have the traffic they did before. And what they're completely missing, of course, is all these people working remotely now have a better family life. They're not driving polluting vehicles to work. They're not losing 1, 2, 2.5, 3 hours a day in a commute. All of that is set aside for this goal of society to churn cash. So just because the goals are good for society doesn't make them good for us as individuals. So take Ben away. Look up Ben on LinkedIn. He's awesome. Ben Killoy, Killoy. But remember, so don't be put off by the obstacles and false goals that are set in front of you, because those obstacles are often created in our own minds to keep us safe from taking what we perceive as a risk. Remember that the middle goal from Bob Parsons, right? Imagine the worst thing that could happen. Really imagine in detail, and then realize it's probably not going to happen. And even if it did, what does that mean? If you end up having to sell your house and live in a smaller house for a while so that ultimately you can attain all your goals, is that a good trade-off? To me, it seems like it's a very good trade-off. So, and most certainly don't be put off by the criticism of others. They're only echoing what they have learned from society. And we already talked about that society's rules aren't necessarily your rules and goals. So there's nothing stopping you from inspiring yourself, or even like Donovan Carrillo, an entire nation. But even if it's just one random stranger and making their world or your world and their life a little better, that's still something that's very, very worthwhile, it seems to me. So that's it for the week. Thanks for stopping by. If you found something interesting, please pass it along. If you're not, please drop me a comment as to what you'd like to hear more about. Have a great week. Thanks for visiting us. Remember, live the life that you dreamed of, because that's the path to true contentment. Love and encouragement to everybody. See you next week on 7 Every Minute and 7everyminute.com. Thank you.